everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm going to be breaking away from the Victorian theme that I've had going for much of October to do two other videos that have been playing a lot on my mind recently. The first actually was an inspiration a few days ago when I watched the play Amadeus with my dear friend, and it was so moving, it was so incredible, and it made me miss going to the theater so much. And I know we will be able to again, but in the meantime, I suddenly had the idea of, well, why don't I talk about all of the plays that I own and I love to maybe inspire others to read them in this period where we can't go to the theater ourselves. We can give that to ourselves at home as best we can. So these are all of the plays that I own in physical form, and I highly recommend all of them, of course. I'll give you a brief overview of most of them because I feel like a lot of them aren't as well known. Although if you do know any and love them as much as I do, please let me know. Tell me down below. I would love to have a friend in this. And if you're intrigued by any of the ones that I talk about, I encourage you to get a hold of them, borrow them, buy them, whatever you prefer, and perhaps turn it into a family affair. Get your family or a bunch of friends together and read through these plays and try and put them on yourself. Have a little 18th century entertainment for yourselves. Okay, let's start with my oversized books. Rent by Jonathan Larson. This book contains the full libretto as well as articles from members of the original cast and crew about the play's creation and opening. If you haven't heard of Rent, it's a rock opera about New York artists living the bohemian lifestyle, but also highlighting problems in modern society, such as drug addiction and AIDS. It's also a spin-off of the opera La Bohème. Come From Away by Irene Sankoff, David Hein, and Lawrence Maslow is an amazing musical about the tiny town of Gander in Newfoundland, Canada, who took in 28 planes worth of passengers in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks. It is the most uplifting and moving pieces of theater that I've seen in a long time. Natasha, Pierre, and the Great Comet of 1812 by Dave Malloy. I had the great pleasure of seeing this musical 3 times on Broadway a few years ago. It's an adaptation of books 3 and 4 of War and Peace. Those books follow Natasha as she and her cousin Sonia go to stay in Moscow. Natasha's fiancé is away at war, but she meets a curious cast of characters in Moscow, some of whom do not have her best interests at heart. The staging made this play immersive, and the musical composition is very modern. There are very strange chords at times, but I loved it. All About Theatre is the National Theatre of London's book about every aspect of putting on a play. I love supporting the National Theatre in any way that I can, and after all, Benedict Cumberbatch blurbed it. How could I refuse? Hamilton, The Revolution by Lin-Manuel Miranda is another book with the libretto of the musical and articles from the cast and crew about the production. If you haven't heard of it by now, Hamilton is about the American Revolution from the perspective of Alexander Hamilton, an influential but lesser-known founding father. It paints American history with all of its complexities and flaws, and I love it. The Bedford Introduction to Drama is a great anthology that I picked up for free at my local university while I was taking a course there. It contains a full overview of drama, from the ancient Greeks to modern day. I'm particularly pleased that it has Betrayal by Harold Pinter, which I saw on Broadway last year, and translations of La Casa de Bernardo Alba by Federico Garcia Lorca, and La Vida es un Ratico by Calderón de la Barca. Poldark, The Complete Scripts, Series 1 and 2 by Debbie Horsfield. I love this series, both the original novels by Winston Graham and the television series. I appreciate how faithful to the books the series was, with the exception of Series 5, which I couldn't bring myself to watch. I'm so pleased they published these books of scripts, and I wish they had published more. The Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson was a quirky and thoroughly funny film about a hotel manager and a lobby boy who wind up involved with the recovery of a stolen painting and a feud over a family inheritance. Bedroom Farce by Alan Ayckbourn takes place in 3 bedrooms over the course of one evening. One young couple is a pair of practical jokers, one older couple is a sensible couple, and the oldest couple is very conservative indeed. That couple's children, Trevor and Susanna, however, are in the process of breaking up, and insist on doing it in everyone else's bedrooms. It's a delightful comedy. King Charles III by Mike Bartlett posits what it might be like when Prince Charles becomes king. To imitate Shakespeare's history plays, it's written in iambic pentameter. I missed it on Broadway, but it still makes a fascinating read. One Man, Two Governors by Richard Bean is a play about Francis, an unemployed man who miraculously lands jobs as a butler to 2 different employers on the same day. His only job now is to try and keep them from finding out about each other. With a wacky cast of characters and mistaken identities mixing in, hilarity ensues. This was one of James Corden's breakout roles, and it is an amazingly funny play. The History Boys by Alan Bennett is about a group of boys preparing to apply to Oxbridge and their rather eccentric tutor. As a language teacher, I find the French lesson the funniest and, in ways, most realistic depiction of what could happen in a high school classroom, but one that I could never get away with myself. The Complete Faulty Towers by John Cleese and Connie Booth is the complete set of scripts for the comedy series about Basil Fawlty and his ramshackle hotel. It's a classic show that's great for children and adults. Written on the Heart by David Edgar is a wonderful play that I saw during my studies in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's all about the creation of the King James Bible from 3 different perspectives. Those who are currently, i.e. in 1613, trying to translate the Latin and Greek texts, those who are in the middle of the Puritan fracture with the Church of England, and a young priest 100 years earlier who was sent into a Dutch prison to convert Wat Tyrrell, who had been sentenced to death for translating the Bible into English, but ends up converted himself. I loved everything this play had to say about the inaccuracies of translation and the politicization of religion. Queen Anne by Helen Edmondson is about Queen Anne and her relationship with the Duchess of Marlborough, debating who was really running the country. Rather more sedate than the film The Favourite, but still a wonderful read about an often overlooked queen. Translations by Brian Friel is about the translation of place names in Ireland from Gaelic to English in the 19th century. Again, I loved how this play was able to capture how personal and deeply cultural a language is, and how translation is a huge part of the erasure of those connections. The Servant of Two Masters by Carlo Goldoni is the commedia dell'arte play upon which One Man, Two Governors was based. Les Liaisons Dangereuses by Christopher Hampton is the stage adaptation of the novel by Pierre Choderlos de Laclos. It follows 2 French aristocrats on the verge of the French Revolution who decide to take on new seductions for fun. This time, however, playing in others' lives backfires on their own. This play and the novel are both brilliant. If I had a time machine, I would want to see the original cast perform this play: Lindsay Duncan and Alan Rickman. The Post by Liz Hanna and Josh Singer was an amazing film about how journalism exposed the Watergate scandal in Richard Nixon's presidency. It was a hymn to good journalism, which is deeply needed these days. The film got some recognition, but I feel like it didn't make the impression that it wanted to. Skylight by David Hare is an incredible play that I got to see on Broadway with Carey Mulligan and Bill Nighy. It follows 2 people reuniting after their breakup a few years earlier, and exploring why they loved one another and why it didn't work. Mulligan and Nighy were fantastic together and commanded the theater the whole time. Stuff Happens, also by David Hare, is about the War on Terror, mostly based on facts, and strays into speculation only when the characters go behind closed doors. It was a fascinating look at Bush and Blair's possible conversations and thought processes, and is well worth a read. Angels in America Millennium Approaches and Perestroika by Tony Kushner is an incredible set of plays about the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. It follows several characters: Prior Walter, who contracts AIDS, and all of the other figures in and around his life, including Roy Cohn, a real political figure who was Donald Trump's mentor. It explores the questions around religion, sexuality, politics, and plagues. But for all of those dark topics, it is full of such hope. My Fair Lady by Alan Lerner and Frederick Loewe is one of my favorite musicals of all time. Singing along with Julie Andrews when I was a child taught me that I could sing. It's about Eliza Doolittle, a flower girl, who is the subject of a bet between Professor Henry Higgins and his friend. They try to turn her into a sophisticated woman of society to present at the embassy ball. I love that this musical highlights all of the problems that arise from this seemingly good-hearted offer, but I feel like very few people see those problems. It's not a romance, but it's fabulous nonetheless. Peter and Alice by John Logan is a speculative play about Peter Llewellyn Davies and Alice Little Hughes, the inspirations for Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. They did meet in 1932, so John Logan imagined what they would have to say to each other. Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel, adapted by Mike Poulton. These are the stage adaptations of her two novels, which I was also lucky enough to see in person. I preferred this version of Cromwell to Mark Rylance's television version, actually. It's more active and earthy, more like the blacksmith's son he is. Cabaret by Masteroff, Kander, and Ebb is the famous musical based on Christopher Isherwood's stories about his time in Berlin in the 1930s. As the Nazi Party gains power, the free and easy life that Sally Bowles and her friends are living is threatened. I love how subversive this musical is. On a superficial reading, it can sound quite upbeat and frivolous, but when put in context, it is dark and moving beyond belief. This version has photos and diaries from the version starring Alan Cumming and Natasha Richardson. I shook leaving the theater when it was revived on Broadway. The Crucible by Arthur Miller is a classic play about the Salem witch trials. It's also a metaphor for the persecution of suspected communists under McCarthy's political leadership in 1950s America. Another of my top favorite plays. In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda is an incredible musical about a community in Washington Heights. Hamilton is moving, but this musical has me sobbing by the fifth song. I cannot wait for the film version to be released. The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged by the Reduced Shakespeare Company is a three-person play in which the company tries to perform all 37 of Shakespeare's plays within one 90-minute show, with hilarious consequences. It's funny to read and even funnier to watch. Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond de Rostand is one of my favorite plays of all time. Cyrano is desperately in love with Roxane, but he fears she will never love him because of his big nose. She is in love with Christian, who is handsome, but tongue-tied around women. These two men then form a plan to help Christian win Roxane, but can Cyrano act as Christian's voice and keep his own feelings hidden? The poetry of this play is beautiful. Cyrano de Bergerac, adapted by Martin Krimp, is a modern adaptation of the same plot, written in a spoken-word poetry style. The dialogue moves quickly, but the rhythms and the effects they produce are incredible. I hope one day it can come to New York like it was supposed to this year, as James McAvoy is a powerhouse in this role. Coriolanus by William Shakespeare. Yes, I have a Complete Works of Shakespeare, but this edition has Tom Hiddleston's face on it. I couldn't resist. The play is about the Roman general Coriolanus and how his immense pride causes him to betray democracy, his country, and possibly even his own family. Saint Joan by George Bernard Shaw chronicles the life of Joan of Arc and her fight against English rule of France and the patriarchy. It is just as relevant as it was when it was written and when Joan herself lived. I have a feeling I will come back to this play again and again. The Rivals, The Critic, and The School for Scandal by Richard Brinsley Sheridan are three 18th century comedies. I think The Rivals is my favorite, which follows two pairs of lovers in Bath and their struggles to be together despite romantic notions and old-fashioned guardians. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum by Shevelov, Gelbart, and Sondheim is a great musical about Pseudolus, a Roman slave, and his quest to gain freedom by helping his master's son and his lover elope. I feel like Sondheim isn't often known for comedies, but this is one of his best. Barefoot in the Park by Neil Simon is about two newlyweds as they begin life together in New York City. Not only do they have to get to know each other and navigate the pitfalls of first living with someone, but her mother and their eccentric upstairs neighbor keep mixing in. This play is hilarious, especially the film starring Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. Fiddler on the Roof by Stein, Bach, and Harnick is a classic musical about Tevye, a Jewish dairy farmer in the town of Anatevka, Russia. He and his community have to confront modernity, pogroms, and interfaith relations, all while trying to maintain their cultural identity. I can't watch it often for how moving it is, but I must say the version in Yiddish that I saw in New York was extra special, as it itself was an attempt to preserve a dying language and a piece of a cultural identity. Love and Friendship by Whit Stillman is the script for the film adaptation of Lady Susan by Jane Austen, about a calculating mother and friend and her adventures in society. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard focuses on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, minor characters in Hamlet, and what they might be doing during the times that their characters are not involved in the plot of Hamlet. This play is just brilliant. That's all I can say. Shakespeare in Love by Tom Stoppard and Mark Norman is still one of my favorite films, even though, as one of my professors said, its plot is wonderful nonsense. It follows Will Shakespeare and his fictional inspiration for Romeo and Juliet and Twelfth Night. Nell Gwyn by Jessica Swale follows Nell Gwyn, an orange girl in the theaters of 1600s London, who works her way up to be an actress, then ends as mistress to King Charles II. She was a real person, and I'd like to think that she was just as full of gumption as Swale wrote her to be. Farinelli and the King by Claire Van Kampen is about the countertenor, think male soprano, Farinelli, whose music was the only thing that could assuage King Philip V of Spain's mental illness. This was an incredible play that featured period music and the singing of countertenor Yeston Davies, which really swept the audience up in its atmosphere. Indecent by Paula Vogel chronicles the progress of one play, God of Vengeance, which was originally written in Yiddish and toured around Europe in the early 1900s. It reached new fame in 1923, however, when it was first performed in English in New York, and the entire cast and crew were arrested for performing a play featuring a female-female relationship. This play is beautiful, dark, and highlights a piece of New York's theater history that is grossly overlooked, the Yiddish theater community of the early 1900s. Salome, Under the Hill, and the Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays by Oscar Wilde. Salome and the Importance of Being Earnest are some of my favorite plays, but I actually haven't read the others in these collections. If you'd recommend any other of his plays, please let me know. So those are all of the plays that I own. Please let me know down below if you are inspired to read any of these or indeed watch them, if there are filmed versions available. And let me know if you love any of these just as much as I do. I'd be thrilled to know. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.